Stay calm when people try to throw you off balance, the invisible trigger that controls you. Someone says something small. A tone shifts. A look lingers just a second longer than usual. A comment lands in a way that feels slightly off. On the surface, it is nothing. But inside you, something reacts instantly. Your body tightens. Your mind speeds up. Your emotional state changes before you even have time to question it. And in that exact moment, something critical happens that most people never notice. You stop choosing. It does not feel like you lost control. It feels like you are responding naturally, even correctly. You justify it in real time. You replay what was said, searching for meaning, for intention, for confirmation that your reaction makes sense. And the more you do that, the deeper you fall into the reaction itself. What started as a small external stimulus becomes a full internal takeover. This is the invisible trigger, the point where someone else's behavior silently dictates your internal state. Not through force, not through authority, but through access. Access to your attention, your interpretation, and ultimately, your reaction. Most people believe they lose control during conflict, during pressure, during intense moments. That is not where it begins. It begins much earlier, in a fraction of a second so subtle it feels insignificant. A micro moment where you unconsciously decide that what just happened requires an emotional response. And once that decision is made, everything else follows automatically. Your tone changes. Your posture shifts. Your words become sharper or more defensive. You stop observing and start participating in a pattern that is no longer under your control. You are no longer responding to the situation. You are being driven by it. What makes this even more powerful is that the person on the other side often does not need to do much. A simple remark, a slight provocation, or even silence can be enough. Because the real mechanism is not external. It is internal. It is the meaning you assign, the story you build, and the speed at which you attach yourself to it. This is why two people can face the same situation and react completely differently. One escalates. The other remains still. One loses clarity. The other gains it. The difference is not the situation. It is the awareness of that invisible moment. There is a gap between what happens and what you do next. It is small, almost imperceptible at first, but it is always there. And inside that gap is where control either disappears or is reclaimed. Most people never see it because they are too fast, too conditioned, too used to reacting without questioning. But once you begin to notice that space, something shifts. You start to see the pattern before it fully forms. You begin to feel the reaction rising before it takes over. And that is where everything changes. Because when you can see it, you are no longer inside it. And when you are no longer inside it, you can choose something different. What you are about to understand next will challenge the way you see people who try to destabilize you. Because the power you think they have might not be real at all. The moment you hand over control, without realizing, there is a precise instant where everything changes, and almost no one notices it. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens quietly, internally, in the space between what someone does and how you begin to feel about it. That is the moment you hand over control. Someone interrupts you. Someone dismisses your opinion. Someone uses a tone that feels disrespectful. And before any conscious thought forms, your system reacts. Not because you chose to, but because you are conditioned to. Your brain interprets the situation as a threat to your identity, your value, or your position. And in that interpretation, it triggers a response. This is where the shift happens. Not when you speak, not when you argue, not when things escalate. It happens earlier, when you accept the emotional frame that was just presented to you, when you agree, without questioning that this moment requires irritation, defensiveness, or anger. The problem is not the situation. The problem is the speed. Everything moves too fast. The stimulus arrives, and the reaction follows immediately, as if they are the same thing. But they are not. There is a separation, a gap that exists whether you notice it or not, and inside that gap is where your power lives. Most people never access it because they are fully identified with what they feel. If they feel disrespected, they become the reaction to that feeling. If they feel challenged, they move instantly to defend. There is no pause, no observation, no space for choice. Just a seamless transition from event to emotion to action. And that is exactly why control is lost, because when there is no pause, there is no authorship. You are no longer directing your behavior. You are executing a pattern. What makes this even more dangerous is how justified it feels. You believe you are right to react. You believe your response is necessary. You believe you are standing your ground. But in reality, you are following a script that was triggered by someone else. They did not control you directly. They activated something in you that you did not question. And once that activation happens, your clarity drops. Your awareness narrows. You stop seeing the situation as it is and start seeing it through the lens of your emotional state. Every word, every gesture, every silence becomes filtered by that initial reaction. This is why small situations escalate, not because they are inherently significant, but because they are fueled by unconscious reactions that build on top of each other. But here is where the shift begins. The moment you learn to detect that first internal movement, everything slows down. You start to feel the reaction forming instead of being consumed by it. You notice the tightening in your body, the change in your breathing, the impulse to respond quickly. And instead of moving with it automatically, you observe it. That observation creates distance. And in that distance, something new becomes available. Choice. You do not need to suppress what you feel. You do not need to pretend nothing happened. You simply stop handing over control at the exact moment it is usually lost. Because the truth is simple. Control is not taken from you. It is given, and it is given in silence, in speed, in unconscious agreement with a reaction you never stop to question. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. And once you stop giving it away, something unexpected happens. The people who once seemed to have power over your emotions start to lose their influence. But what you will see next goes even deeper, because the power you think they have might depend entirely on something you have been giving them all along. The illusion of power of those who try to throw you off balance. There is something important you need to see clearly. The people who try to destabilize you do not actually hold power over you. What they hold is an opportunity that only becomes real if you complete the process for them. When someone provokes, criticizes, or tries to get under your skin, they are not in control of your emotional state. They are testing access. They are placing a stimulus in front of you and waiting to see if you will pick it up, interpret it, and react to it. Because the moment you react, you validate the attempt. That is where the illusion begins. From the outside, it looks like they have power. They say something and you change. Your tone shifts. Your posture tightens. Your focus narrows. It appears as if they caused it. But what actually happened is more precise. You participated in the reaction. They initiated. You completed. And this dynamic is what creates the false perception of control. Not because they are stronger, smarter, or more dominant, but because they understand something most people ignore. Reactions are predictable. Patterns are reliable. And once someone learns how you react under pressure, they can anticipate your behavior without needing to control you directly. That is why certain people repeat the same behaviors, the same comments, the same tone, the same subtle provocations, because they are not improvising. They are pressing buttons that have worked before. And if those buttons still work, they will continue to use them. But here is what breaks the entire mechanism. The moment your reaction becomes unpredictable, their strategy collapses. If they expect irritation and find calm, they lose direction. If they expect defensiveness and find stillness, they lose leverage. If they expect engagement and find silence, they lose momentum. Not because you overpowered them, but because you removed the element they depend on most, your reaction. This is why calmness is not passive. It is disruptive. It interrupts patterns. It denies access. It forces the other person into uncertainty. And most people are not prepared to operate without predictable feedback. They rely on your reaction to guide their next move. Without it, they are left without structure. And that is where the illusion breaks. Because what looked like their power was actually your consistency in reacting. Once that consistency disappears, so does their influence. But there is a deeper layer to this. Because even when you understand that their power is an illusion, something inside you may still want to react. There is a pull, an urge, a need to respond, to correct, to defend, to prove something. And that is not coming from them. That is coming from you. Which leads to the next level of understanding. Because the real challenge is not what people do. It is the internal pattern that makes you feel compelled to respond immediately. The emotional addiction to immediate reaction. There is a reason why staying calm feels difficult, even when you understand everything you just heard. It is not just habit. It is not just personality. It is a form of conditioning so deep that it operates like an addiction. The urge to react immediately is not random. It is reinforced over time. Every time you respond quickly, every time you defend yourself on impulse, every time you match someone's tone without thinking, your brain registers that behavior as necessary. It links reaction with relief. It creates a loop where reacting feels like resolution, even when it only makes things worse. And that loop becomes automatic. Something happens, and before you even process it consciously, your system is already preparing a response. Your mind starts building arguments. Your body prepares for tension. Your attention locks onto the situation as if it demands immediate action. You feel pulled into it, almost as if doing nothing would be unnatural. That feeling is the addiction. It is the need to close the gap as quickly as possible, the discomfort of leaving a moment unresolved, the internal pressure that tells you that if you do not react now, you are losing something. Respect, control, position, identity. But that pressure is not truth. It is conditioning. Because when you look closely, reacting immediately rarely improves anything. It escalates. It narrows your thinking. It makes you predictable. And most importantly, it keeps you trapped in a cycle where your behavior is constantly dictated by external triggers. The brain prefers speed over accuracy when it is conditioned this way. It does not stop to evaluate. It executes. And the more it executes, the stronger the pattern becomes. This is why people repeat the same reactions in different situations. Different faces, different contexts, same outcome. Not because the situations are identical, but because the internal response is. And here is where it becomes even more subtle. Sometimes the reaction is not visible. You may stay silent externally, but internally you are fully engaged. You replay what happened. You build arguments in your head. You justify what you would say. You carry the emotional charge long after the moment has passed. That is still reaction, because the addiction is not only about what you express, it is about what you sustain internally. The longer you hold on to that internal response, the more you reinforce the pattern. Breaking this requires something most people avoid: discomfort. The discomfort of not reacting. The discomfort of letting a moment remain open. The discomfort of feeling something without immediately acting on it. At first, it feels unnatural. It feels incomplete. It feels like you are holding back something that needs to be released. But that is exactly where the shift begins. When you allow the urge to exist without obeying it, you start to weaken the pattern. You create a separation between impulse and action. You begin to see the reaction as something that arises, not something you must follow. And once you see it that way, the urgency starts to fade. You realize that you do not need to respond to everything. You do not need to match energy. You do not need to resolve every tension immediately. You can let things pass without engaging, without losing anything real. That is when control starts to return. Because you are no longer reacting out of compulsion. You are choosing when, how, and if you respond at all. But to do that consistently, you need to understand something even deeper. Because not every emotion that arises needs to define you, and that distinction changes everything. The difference between feeling an emotion and becoming the emotion. There is a critical distinction that most people never learn to make, and because of that, they spend their lives being carried by emotions they believe they are controlling. The difference is simple in theory but transformative in practice. You can feel an emotion without becoming it. The problem is that most people do not experience it that way. When anger appears, they become anger. When frustration rises, they become frustration. There is no separation between what is felt and who they are in that moment. The emotion takes over the entire system, and from there, every thought, every word, and every action is influenced by it. It feels natural. It feels authentic. It feels like you are being honest with what you feel. But what is actually happening is identification. You are merging with a temporary internal state and allowing it to define your behavior completely. This is where control disappears again, but in a more subtle way. Because now it is not just the situation influencing you, it is the emotion itself. Once you become the emotion, you no longer question it. You justify it. You defend it. You act from it as if it represents clarity, when in reality, it is narrowing your perception. Everything becomes filtered through that emotional lens. A simple comment becomes an attack. A neutral tone becomes disrespect. A small disagreement becomes a threat, not because the situation changed, but because your state changed. And once that happens, your interpretation follows your emotion, not the facts. This is why two people can experience the same moment and walk away with completely different conclusions. One remains grounded, the other escalates internally. The difference is not intelligence or strength. It is separation, the ability to feel without becoming. When you start to observe your emotions instead of merging with them, something shifts immediately. You still feel the anger. You still notice the irritation. Nothing is suppressed. Nothing is denied. But at the same time, you are aware that what you feel is not who you are. That awareness creates space. In that space, the emotion loses its authority. It is no longer commanding your behavior. It is simply present. Like a signal passing through your system, you can look at it, understand it, and decide what to do next without being pushed into action. This is where real control begins. Because now, instead of reacting from the emotion, you are responding while the emotion exists. That changes everything. Your words become intentional, your tone becomes stable, your presence becomes grounded, even in situations that used to destabilize you. And here is something most people overlook. Emotions are temporary by nature. They rise, peak, and pass. But when you become them, you extend their life. You feed them with attention, with thoughts, with reactions. You keep them active longer than they would naturally last. When you observe instead of merge, you allow them to move through you without resistance and without control over you. This is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about becoming precise. You are no longer driven by what you feel in the moment. You are guided by what you choose, even while feeling it. That is a completely different level of stability. And once you develop that separation, you gain access to something that most people underestimate. A tool that does not require force, argument, or dominance to shift any situation. Because sometimes, the most powerful move is not what you say. It is what you choose not to say. Silence as a strategy of disorientation. Most people underestimate silence because they associate power with speaking, reacting, and asserting. But in moments of tension, silence has a very different effect. It disrupts expectations. It removes the feedback that the other person is unconsciously relying on. And when used with awareness, it creates a level of control that words often cannot achieve. When someone tries to provoke you, they are not just expressing something. They are seeking a response. They are waiting for a reaction that confirms impact. That reaction gives them direction. It tells them whether to push further, change tone, escalate, or retreat. Your response becomes their guide. Now remove that. When you choose silence not as avoidance but as control, something shifts immediately. The other person loses their reference point. There is no emotional feedback to read, no tone to mirror, no reaction to build on. What they expected to be a predictable exchange becomes uncertain. And uncertainty creates discomfort, because most people are not prepared to operate without signals. They depend on your reactions to understand where they stand. Without that, they begin to question themselves. They repeat what they said. They adjust their tone. They try to provoke again, sometimes more directly, sometimes more subtly. But if the silence remains grounded, not passive, not weak, just present, the dynamic starts to invert. You are no longer inside their frame. They are now reacting to your absence of reaction. This is where silence becomes strategic. It is not about saying nothing. It is about not giving away your internal state. It is about holding your position without feeding the situation with unnecessary energy. You are still aware. You are still engaged. But you are not participating in the emotional exchange they initiated. And that creates space for clarity. In silence, you have time. Time to observe, to assess, to decide. While the other person is moving impulsively, you remain still, and that stillness is not empty. It is controlled. It is intentional. It is what allows you to respond, if you choose to, from a place that is not contaminated by the initial trigger. But there is an important distinction here. Silence only works when it is stable internally. If you are silent outside but reactive inside, the tension leaks through. Your body, your expression, your energy will still communicate what you are trying to hide, and that weakens the effect. True silence is aligned. What you show and what you feel are not in conflict. You are not suppressing. You are simply not engaging. That is what makes it disorienting, because the person in front of you cannot find an entry point. There is nothing to grab, nothing to push against, nothing to escalate. And without that, the interaction loses momentum. Over time, this changes how people approach you. The ones who rely on reactions lose interest. The ones who test boundaries stop testing, not because you confronted them, but because you removed the reward they were seeking. And that is a different kind of strength. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise. However, there is something even more subtle happening beneath these interactions, because some people seem to know exactly where to push, even without you saying much. And that is not accidental. How difficult people detect your emotional weaknesses. There is a pattern that most people fail to notice. Certain individuals do not provoke randomly. They observe first. They test lightly. They pay attention to small shifts that almost no one else sees. And from those small signals, they map your emotional structure. It starts in subtle ways. A slight change in your expression when a specific topic is mentioned. A faster response when your authority is questioned. A defensive tone when your competence is challenged. These are not obvious reactions, but they are enough. Because for someone who is attentive, these micro-responses reveal where your boundaries are unstable. And once that is identified, the interaction changes. What used to be general behavior becomes targeted. The comments become more precise. The tone becomes more intentional. The timing becomes calculated. It is no longer about saying anything. It is about saying the right thing at the right moment to trigger a predictable reaction. This is why it can feel like certain people know exactly how to affect you. It is not intuition. It is pattern recognition. They are not controlling you directly. They are using the information you have already provided. Every visible reaction becomes data. Every emotional shift becomes a reference point. And over time, that data allows them to anticipate how you will respond before you even realize it yourself. This is where most people misunderstand the situation. They think the problem is the other person's behavior. But the real vulnerability is the visibility of their own reactions. The more transparent your emotional triggers are, the easier it becomes for someone else to navigate them. And this does not require manipulation at a high level. Even unconsciously, people adjust based on what they see works. If a certain comment gets a reaction, it is likely to be repeated. If a certain tone creates tension, it becomes a tool, not because they planned it in detail, but because human behavior adapts quickly to feedback. This is why emotional control is not only internal, it is also strategic. When your reactions become less visible, less immediate, less predictable, the feedback loop breaks. The other person no longer receives clear signals. They cannot easily identify what affects you and what does not. And without that clarity, their ability to influence you decreases significantly. You become harder to read. And when you are harder to read, you are harder to move. But this is not about becoming closed or distant. It is about becoming selective. You choose what to reveal and when. You decide what deserves a response and what does not. You stop broadcasting every internal shift through external behavior. That alone changes how people interact with you. Because what used to be easy access becomes limited. And when access is limited, influence weakens. But there is a deeper layer beneath this. Because the things that affect you the most are rarely random. They are connected to something internal, something unresolved, something that existed long before the current situation. And until you see that clearly, certain triggers will continue to repeat, no matter who is in front of you. The mirror effect. Why certain provocations affect you so deeply. There is a reason why some comments pass through you without impact while others stay, echo, and grow stronger the more you think about them. It is not about the words themselves. It is about what they touch inside you. Certain provocations do not create the reaction, they reveal it. When something someone says affects you deeply, it is often because it connects to an internal narrative that already exists. A doubt you have not fully resolved, an insecurity you have not fully faced, a belief about yourself that is still unstable. And when that external stimulus aligns with that internal point, the reaction intensifies. This is the mirror effect. The situation becomes more than what is happening in the present. It activates something from your past, from your identity, from the way you see yourself. And because of that, your response is no longer proportional to the moment. It carries weight from something deeper. That is why a simple comment can feel like an attack, not because of what was said, but because of what it confirms internally. If someone questions your competence and you are completely secure in it, the comment has no ground to land on. It passes. But if there is uncertainty, even a small one, the same comment expands. It sticks. It demands attention. And from there, the reaction begins to build. You start defending, explaining, justifying, or even replaying the moment long after it has ended. Not to address the situation, but to resolve the internal tension it exposed. This is where most people focus in the wrong direction. They try to control the outside. They want people to stop saying certain things, to behave differently, to avoid specific triggers. But even if that happens, the internal structure remains the same. And as long as it remains, something else will eventually activate it again. Because the trigger is not the cause, it is the access point. Understanding this changes how you interpret these moments. Instead of seeing them as attacks to resist, you begin to see them as signals to analyze. Not in a passive way, but in a precise way. You ask a different question. Not, why did they say that? But why did this affect me the way it did? That question shifts the focus back to where real control exists. And when you start to examine those internal points without judgment, something begins to stabilize. The same triggers lose intensity. The same comments lose weight. Not because people changed, but because the internal structure they relied on is no longer as reactive. You are no longer responding to echoes. You are responding to what is actually happening. And that creates clarity. Because now, instead of reacting to layers of past and interpretation, you are present in the moment with a level of neutrality that most people never reach. But awareness alone is not enough, because even when you understand your triggers, there is still a gap between knowing and acting differently. That gap is defined by something very specific. Time. Reprogramming your response. Time. There is a single variable that changes everything, yet most people ignore it completely. Not what you feel, not what was said, not even the situation itself. The variable is time. More specifically, the time between what happens and how you respond. Right now, that time is almost non-existent. Something happens and your reaction follows immediately. It feels instant, natural, inseparable. But it is not. It only appears that way because your system has been trained to eliminate the gap. Reprogramming your response time means restoring that gap and expanding it deliberately. At first, this feels unnatural. You will notice the impulse to respond quickly, the urge to speak, to defend, to correct. It will feel like delaying your reaction is a disadvantage, like you are giving up ground or losing control of the moment. But the opposite is true. When you slow down your response, you regain control over the direction of the interaction. You stop feeding the situation with automatic energy and start introducing intentional presence. That alone shifts the entire dynamic. Because while the other person is operating in speed, you are operating in clarity. And clarity requires time. Even a few seconds change everything. A pause before speaking, a breath before reacting, a moment of observation before forming a response. These are not passive delays. They are active interruptions of the automatic pattern. In that pause, you begin to see more. You notice your internal reaction forming. You recognize the tone, the tension, the impulse, and instead of following it immediately, you hold it. You let it exist without converting it into action. That is the reprogramming. You are teaching your system that not every stimulus requires an immediate response. You are breaking the link between impulse and execution. And the more you do this, the more space you create between what you feel and what you choose to do. Over time, this space becomes natural. What once felt like effort becomes default. You no longer rush to respond. You assess. You decide. You act with intention instead of urgency. And this has a direct effect on how others perceive you. When you do not react immediately, you become harder to read. Your behavior is no longer predictable. Your responses carry more weight because they are not impulsive. People start to pay more attention, not because you are louder, but because you are precise. And precision creates impact. But there is another layer to this. Slowing down your response does not only affect your actions, it affects your internal state. The more time you allow between stimulus and response, the less intense the emotional charge becomes. What felt urgent begins to lose intensity. What felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Time dissolves reactivity. And when reactivity dissolves, control emerges. You are no longer being pulled into situations. You are stepping into them with awareness. You are no longer trying to keep up with the moment. You are setting the pace of it. That is a different level of presence. But even with control over your timing, there is something else that communicates before you say a single word. Something that people read instantly, often without realizing it. And that is where the next layer begins. The invisible posture of someone who cannot be manipulated. Before you say anything, before you react, before you even decide what to do, something about you is already communicating. It is not your words. It is not your arguments. It is your presence, and people read it instantly. There is a difference between someone who is trying to stay calm and someone who is naturally grounded. One is holding tension beneath the surface. The other is stable without effort. That difference is subtle, but it is impossible to hide. Your posture, your eye contact, your breathing, the way you hold silence, the way you listen. All of it sends signals. Not consciously, not in a calculated way, but consistently. And those signals tell others how much influence they can have over you. If there is tension, it is noticed. If there is urgency, it is felt. If there is a need to prove something, it becomes visible. And once those signals are detected, they shape how people interact with you. This is why control is not only about what you do, it is about what you transmit without trying. Someone who cannot be manipulated does not need to show strength. They do not need to assert dominance. Their presence is enough. It is steady, contained, and clear. There is no rush to respond, no need to fill space, no visible reaction that can be used as leverage. And that creates a very specific effect. It removes entry points. When someone looks for a reaction and finds none, when they look for instability and see none, when they try to provoke and nothing moves, they begin to adjust. Not because they were told to, but because there is nothing to work with. This is not about becoming distant or cold. It is about becoming aligned. What you feel, What you think and how you present yourself are not in conflict. There is no internal noise leaking through your behavior, no inconsistency between your internal state and your external expression. That alignment is what creates presence, and presence changes interactions before they even begin. People hesitate more. They choose their words more carefully. They test less. Not because they fear you, but because they cannot predict you. And unpredictability, when combined with calm, creates a form of control that does not require effort. You are not reacting to the situation, you are defining the tone of it. But this level of stability introduces a new dynamic that most people are not prepared for. Because when you stop reacting, when you remain calm, when you no longer provide the expected emotional feedback, some people do not step back. They push harder, when your calmness provokes others. Even more. At a certain point, something unexpected begins to happen. The more stable you become, the less you react, the more grounded your presence is, the more some people seem to intensify their behavior. They push harder, they repeat themselves, they escalate their tone. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because your calm disrupts what they rely on. Most interactions are built on emotional exchange. One person reacts, the other responds, and the cycle continues. But when you remove your reaction from that cycle, the structure breaks. And for someone who depends on that structure, the absence of feedback creates tension. They are not reacting to you directly. They are reacting to the loss of control they used to feel. Your calm becomes a mirror they did not expect. It reflects their behavior back to them without distortion, and without your reaction to justify their tone or escalate the situation. They are left alone with their own intensity. That is uncomfortable. So they try to restore the old pattern. They increase pressure. They become more direct. Sometimes more aggressive, sometimes more subtle, but always with the same objective: to get a reaction, to reestablish the dynamic where your emotional state responds to their actions. And this is where most people fail, even after learning everything up to this point. Because when the pressure increases, the instinct to react returns, stronger, more convincing, more urgent. It feels like staying calm is no longer enough. It feels like you need to respond, to assert, to push back. But that instinct is the final test. If you react at this stage, the entire pattern resets. The dynamic returns to what it was before, and everything you built until now collapses back into predictability. But if you hold your position, something different happens. The escalation loses energy. Without your reaction to sustain it, the other person cannot maintain the same level of intensity for long. It becomes unsustainable. The effort to provoke without feedback becomes exhausting, and gradually the behavior either fades or shifts. Not because you forced it, but because you did not feed it. This is where calm becomes more than control. It becomes influence. You are no longer just protecting your internal state. You are actively shaping the environment without needing to dominate it. Your stability sets the boundary without words. Your lack of reaction defines what is and is not effective. And over time, this changes how people approach you. The ones who rely on reactions begin to disengage. The ones who respect stability begin to align. The entire dynamic reorganizes around your consistency. But there is a deeper transformation happening beneath all of this. Because when you maintain this level of control repeatedly, across different situations, with different people, something internal begins to solidify. It stops being a technique. It becomes who you are. The point of no emotional return. There comes a moment where this stops being something you practice and starts becoming something you are. It is not sudden. It does not announce itself. But if you pay attention, you will notice the shift. Situations that used to affect you no longer have the same impact. Triggers that once felt intense now pass with little resistance. The need to react begins to disappear. This is the point of no emotional return. It is not that you stop feeling. It is that what you feel no longer controls what you do. The separation you built becomes stable. It no longer requires effort to pause, to observe, to choose. It happens naturally, without tension, without internal conflict. And because of that, your entire experience changes. You start to move through situations with a different kind of clarity. You are not anticipating conflict. You are not preparing defenses. You are not carrying emotional residue from previous interactions. Each moment is approached as it is, not as a continuation of what came before. This creates a level of lightness that most people never experience. Because what drains energy is not the situation itself. It is the constant internal reaction to it. The replaying, the anticipation, the emotional buildup. When that disappears, your energy becomes available again. Your attention becomes sharper. Your presence becomes stronger. And people notice it. Not because you say anything about it, but because your behavior becomes consistent in a way that is rare. You are not easily moved. You are not pulled into unnecessary tension. You do not escalate when others do. And that stability becomes your baseline. This is where respect starts to change form. It is no longer based on what you say or how you defend yourself. It is based on what cannot be shaken. People begin to recognize that certain approaches do not work with you, that certain behaviors do not produce the same effect. And without needing to declare it, you establish a boundary that is understood without explanation. But there is something even more important happening internally. You stop needing to prove anything. The urge to correct others, to defend your image, to win small interactions begins to lose relevance. Not because you are suppressing it, but because it no longer feels necessary. Your sense of self is no longer dependent on how others behave toward you. And that is where real freedom appears. Because now your state is not tied to external conditions. It is not dependent on respect, validation, or agreement. It is self-contained, stable, independent. And once you reach this point, going back becomes difficult. Not because you cannot react, but because reacting the old way no longer makes sense. It feels misaligned. It feels unnecessary. It feels like stepping into a version of yourself that no longer fits. This is the shift most people are looking for without realizing it. Not control over others, control over themselves in a way that cannot be easily disrupted. And when that becomes your default, something final becomes clear. Calm is not just a way to handle situations. It is a position. Calmness as the supreme form of power. At the highest level, calm is no longer a technique, a strategy, or a response. It becomes a position you occupy. A way of moving through the world that does not depend on circumstances, on people, or on outcomes. And from that position, everything changes, because power is often misunderstood. Most people associate it with control over others, with dominance, with the ability to influence external situations. But real power operates differently. It is the ability to remain unchanged when everything around you tries to move you. When someone cannot disturb your state, they cannot control your behavior. When they cannot control your behavior, they cannot predict you. And when they cannot predict you, they lose the ability to influence you. That is power in its purest form. It is silent. It does not need to be displayed. It does not require recognition. It is felt through consistency, through the absence of unnecessary reaction, through the clarity of someone who is not internally divided. At this level, calm is not passive. It is precise. You still act. You still speak. You still make decisions. But none of it comes from impulse. None of it is driven by the need to respond emotionally. Every action is chosen, not triggered. Every word is placed, not released. And that precision creates impact far beyond force. Because while others are reacting, you are directing. While others are escalating, you are defining the tone. While others are trying to gain control, you are already operating from it. There is no urgency, no need to prove, no need to correct every perception or win every interaction. You are no longer playing at the surface level where most conflicts exist. You are operating beneath it, and from there you see things differently. You see that most provocations are empty without your participation. You see that most tension dissolves when it is not fed. You see that the majority of what used to affect you only had power because it was reinforced by your own reactions. Once that becomes clear, something final settles. You stop being available for manipulation. Not because you avoid people, not because you isolate yourself, but because there is no entry point left, no immediate reaction to hook into, no instability to amplify, no internal gap that can be easily accessed from the outside. And that changes everything. Because now your calm is not a defense. It is a form of authority. An authority that does not need to be announced, argued, or defended. It is simply present in every interaction, in every moment, in every response you choose or choose not to give. And the next time someone tries to throw you off balance, something will be different. Not the situation, not the person, you.